Antipodes, Chapter 31. The bright blue juices from the strange fruit drizzled down in Incendia's muzzle, the bitter, slightly electric taste fresh in her mouth. "Are you sure these are safe to eat?" she asked, eyeing the half-eaten fruit floating a few inches in front of her. "Pretty sure," Jigsaw said, his own fruit hovering next to him. "When I examined the tree, I really didn't feel anything malignant. These definitely aren't natural, though, whatever they are." Incendia's stomach growled in hunger, but she put the fruit away. "I think I'll save this for later," she said. The trees only grew thicker as they walked. A layer of thick gray clouds blocked out the sun, the blue-green light illuminating the area coming from the thin layer of moss on the forest floor. A loud, clear whistle and a rustle of branches heralded Tiptoe's return. She slowly fluttered down from the canopy, the buffets of air disturbing the moss below and causing it to flare brighter and cast strange, spindly shadows on the trunks of the trees on the edges of the clearing. Tiptoe alighted on the bright patch of moss, and she trotted up to Incendia and Jigsaw. "Something's keeping me from breaking through," Tiptoe said. "When I fly up, it's like there's something breathing down. A hot gust that keeps me from going up any farther." "I was afraid of that," Jigsaw said seriously. "I think we are more than lost. Something wants us here." "A fragment?" asked Tiptoe, ruffling her wings. Jigsaw sighed, his shoulders drooping as he stared at the ground. "It would explain a lot. These trees didn't grow like this naturally. In fact, I think that might be why the goddesses have finally calmed down. Maybe we're getting closer." Incendia cleared her throat, and Jigsaw turned to look at her. "If there is a fragment here, wouldn't that make 3, as in one full goddess? What happens then?" Jigsaw's face remained blank, but his voice was heavy with fatigue. "I guess we find out." For a long while no pony made a noise, preferring to sit in the gloomy light from the moss and eat the strange fruits. "I think we should probably camp here tonight," Jigsaw finally said, breaking the silence. "Incendia, can you light us a campfire?" "There's no firewood," Incendia pointed out. "I'm a bit nervous about burning these branches as full of magic as they are. Can you do that fireball, the one you did back at the castle?" "It will only last a few hours," Incendia warned. "We can't count on it to keep things away." "It's the best chance we have without being unsafe." "All right," Incendia said. Her horn shimmered orange, and with a sudden flash of light and heat, a tiny ball of fire hung a foot above the ground in the center of the clearing, rotating like a miniature sun. The heat and light it gave off seemed to drive out some of the gloom. "Thank you," Jigsaw said, promptly curling into a tight ball, and closed his eyes. "I'll be right back," Incendia said. "Nature calls." One of Jigsaw's eyes fluttered open. "Don't go far, and if anything happens, shout." Incendia nodded and left the clearing. She trotted past the giant, thick trunks of the strange trees before stopping at the mouth of another, much smaller, clear area. A warm breeze picked up, blowing through the clearing, and a clear beam of silvery light washed out the strange blue-green illumination of the fungus. Incendia looked up to see the bushy limbs of the trees had been pushed aside, giving her a clear view of the sky. Incendia stared up in awe, for above her was not the colorful twilight she had grown accustomed to, The moon was directly above, not the crumbling, dull gray moon she was used to, but a whole, bright moon, shining brilliantly down into the clearing. However, even as she watched, the moon shifted and changed, seeming to flicker and grow transparent for a moment before snapping back into place, as though it was being projected. The sky didn't seem right either. Instead of the pale blue tinted with the orange of the perpetually setting sun, the sky seemed tinged green, a sickeningly familiar green. Then, without warning, the tree limbs snapped back into place, cutting off the strange silvery beam of light. When it had touched the clearing, the moss seemed to glow brighter and brighter until a strangled shout from the distance broke Incendia out of her reverie. A moment later, Tiptoe burst out from between the trees, screaming, "Incendia, help! Something's attacking the camp!" Jigsaw's dreams were turbulent. He walked over a snowy landscape, the wind whipping around him and causing white frost to form at the edge of his mane. His voice rasped when he tried to speak, his throat as dry as sandpaper. As the wind picked up, however, it blew away the layer of snow, revealing a huge, elaborate tangle of water pipes, valves, gauges, and switches. Jigsaw bent down and touched his horn to the nearest valve and felt the blockages in the system. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes, drawing magical power from his internal reserve and holding it for a moment. Then he let the spell loose. Blue light pulsed from his horn and down through the pipes, forcing the blockages out and breaking them into pieces. Jigsaw smiled at a job well done and turned the nearest valve with his mouth. A small faucet and a basin rose from the pipe, and Jigsaw eagerly awaited the flood of water he expected. The faucet rumbled, and, with a distant scream that was nearly drowned out by the wind, thick, steaming blood poured out. Jigsaw's eyes wept open just in time to feel a hot, wet gust of air blow through the clearing. As it met the glowing miniature sun in the center of the impromptu campsite, the sphere flickered and grew suddenly bright, sending off a wave of heat so intense, Jigsaw had to scramble to his hooves and step back before it suddenly winked out. Jigsaw looked around wildly, but the only thing he saw was Tiptoe standing at the edge of the clearing, wings outstretched in shock, staring back at him. "What in Celestia's name was that?" Her words were cut off by a pair of sudden, piercing electric blue lights that appeared from the darkness behind the edge of the clearing. The lights came forward into the gloom of the moss, and the creature's features became defined. A small, somewhat squashed face surrounded by a pale blue mane, leading back to a monstrously huge body terminating in a long, segmented tail with a sharp, hooked stinger on the end. "A manticore," Tiptoe said, her voice barely more than a whisper in the gloom of the clearing. The manticore sniffed at the air, bright eyes flickering back and forth between the two ponies. "Tiptoe," Jigsaw said, his voice oddly even and calm. "Go get Incendia. Now." "Jigsaw, I can't leave you." "Go!" Jigsaw shouted, igniting his horn and slamming the manticore across the face with a magically bent tree limb. Tiptoe leapt off and galloped into the darkness, and Jigsaw focused on the manticore, who stared at him angrily, baring its teeth. The creature roared at him and lowered its head for a charge. Jigsaw jumped to one side, skidding a bright track in the moss below. The manticore wasn't able to turn tightly enough to hit Jigsaw, but its tail whipped around and the stinger caught him in his right flank above his cutie mark, leaving a bright red trail. Jigsaw let out a strangled cry as a white-hot pain shot through his whole right side. The manticore growled and lined itself up for another charge. Jigsaw attempted to stumble to the side, but his right side didn't appear to move. Horrified, Jigsaw saw that tendrils of electric blue were winding out from the spot where the stinger had pierced his flesh. The white-hot pain was rapidly fading, replaced by a horrible, tingling numbness. The manticore roared and lowered its head for it to charge again, when a bolt of bright orange came whizzing out of the trees and slammed into the muscle-bound side of the creature. The beast roared and stumbled, crashing into the ground and cutting a gorge into the mossy ground and revealing the dark soil underneath. Not a moment later, Incendia and Tiptoe burst out of the undergrowth, panting heavily. Flames danced around Incendia's horn, and as the manticore unsteadily rose to its feet, the flames immediately spread down and brought her coal-black fur. The manticore shook its head, seemingly unfazed by the attack. Where the fireball had hit, blue sparks danced across the manticore's skin, as though a bundle of electrical wires had been exposed. Before the manticore could fully recover from the shock of the sudden hit, Incendia blazed brightly and blasted it with another burst of fire. The creature staggered, but the fire seemed to roll off of it with an electric crackle of power. "Incendia, look out!" Jigsaw cried, and Incendia artfully dodged the sudden flash of black as the creature's stinger embedded itself where she had been standing a moment before. The manticore yanked its stinger out of the ground, leaving a pool of blue venom behind. It raised the stinger in preparation for another strike, but before it could follow through, a flash of yellow darted in, twisting the stinger out of position and causing the beast to roar in pain. Tiptoe dove down again, hooves outstretched, driving the tip of the stinger deep into the wood of a nearby tree. The manticore roared in frustration and attempted to pull its stinger out of the unyielding wood. "Incendia, now!" Tiptoe shouted. Incendia braced herself and felt a pressure building in her horn, drawing magic from her internal wellspring and focusing it in her horn. The flames that billowed forth from the tip of her horn began to turn blue, flowing over the rest of her body. When Incendia couldn't stand it anymore, she let the power issue from the tip of her horn and directed it towards the trapped creature, snarling at her from across the clearing. The flames poured over the manticore, flames meeting the magical flesh with a sharp blue crackle. However, the crackling appeared to be diminishing even as Incendia watched. The blue flames seemed to be creeping under the crackling blue shield, scorching the flesh below. The manticore began to writhe, strangled cries of pain and agitation barely audible over the jet-like roar of Incendia's onslaught. With one mighty yank and the sound of splintering wood, the manticore freed itself from the tree and retreated, smoking, out of the clearing and into the dark of the woods. With concentrated effort, Incendia cut off the flow of magic and felt the flames that cloaked her die down and fade into darkness. She stood there, breathing hard, staring at the flaming trunk of the tree with the oozing stinger wound embedded within, until a dry cough from her right caught her attention. "Jigsaw!" Tiptoe shouted, rushing over to where he laid on the ground, scarlet blood staining the blue-green moss below. Strange, curling electric blue tendrils spread out under his skin from the gaping puncture in his flank, pulsing eerily like a perverse heartbeat. "I can't feel my right side," Jigsaw said weakly. "I think that stinger was poisoned." "Are you okay?" Incendia asked, trotting up beside Tiptoe. "I don't know, but you saved my life," Jigsaw said, lifting his head so as to better see the two. "Thank you. I need you both to step back, though. I'm going to try and heal it." Incendia and Tiptoe obliged, and Jigsaw slowly pushed himself up into a sitting position. To Tiptoe's disgust, a small amount of brilliantly blue liquid spurted from the wound as he sat up, mixing with the blood soaking into the moss below. Jigsaw's horn began to glow, a much more comforting and familiar blue. He craned his head around, attempting to better aim at the hole in his flank. His horn began to glow brighter. Tiptoe's ears suddenly perked up. A quiet, extremely high-pitched, keening noise had begun in the clearing. As the glow in Jigsaw's horn grew in intensity, the sharp noise grew louder. "What is that?" Incendia shouted over the ring that had risen to a deafening pitch. In answer, Jigsaw shouted in pain, and the keening noise grew louder still. His horn flashed several times, so brightly that Tiptoe was momentarily blinded. Then, without warning, the noise was cut off, and Jigsaw slumped to the ground with a heavy thump. Tiptoe rushed forward, but Jigsaw allayed her fears by struggling again into a sitting position. "What happened?" Tiptoe asked, eyes wide with concern and surprise. "I have no idea," Jigsaw responded, breathing heavily. "It's like something is blocking me, and I feel so weak." His eyelids fluttered, and he swayed where he sat for a moment before he snapped back to consciousness. "Okay, listen, I'm almost certain there's a fragment here. I don't know what else could have affected the local flora and fauna so much, but I don't think I have much time." "But," Tiptoe said desperately, "but the fragments of the goddesses will protect you, right?" "That's the thing," Jigsaw said. "I can't feel them anymore. Or I can, but it feels like they're far away and being blocked in the same way I am. It has to be a fragment. We need to get to it quickly. You need to." Jigsaw trailed off as his eyes rolled back into his head and he slumped, unconscious, onto the glowing ground. "Jigsaw?" Tiptoe said. Then she shouted, "Jigsaw!" "Look!" Incendia said. "He's still breathing." Tiptoe looked closer, and sure enough, Jigsaw's chest was still rising and falling slowly and regularly. Gently she lowered her ear to his chest, listening to his labored breathing for a moment. "Well," she said anxiously, "what do we do?" "We're going to have to find the fragment by ourselves," Incendia said grimly.